Hello, hello. Welcome in, everybody. Um, if you can hear us, like put something in the chat, say hello, where you're from, the country, maybe what your favorite color is and your favorite ice cream. Let's go with those three and just see what happens. But making sure we work. And Ameet, if you have a question for the chat as well, go for it.
Say hello to everyone. Butter pecan, yes. Hello, Lynn. How you doing? It's one of my favorites over here too.
Yeah, I think I was looking at but just before we were about to go live here, I was looking at I think got 15 countries, I think it was, of people registered for this. So we got Connecticut with cookies and cream, and so yeah, I guess we'll see how it happens.
Well, we're spread out too, right? I'm here in Ontario, Canada. You're down south, aren't you, JJ?
Yeah, like I'm currently in South America, normally in the U.S., but I'm currently in Colombia. For everybody who wants to speak some Spanish, my technical Spanish though is not going to work out. We're not going to be talking about this presentation in Spanish, but
we're going to stick English on this for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it sounds like people can hear us, and the chat is looking lively. And so let's just hop into things, and people can join when they join. This will be recorded also, so if you guys have to hop, that's totally fine. But there is going to be some nice little sprinkles of excitement here at the end. That will only be for the first few people here. So we're going to run through that together. And before we start, I will apologize. I am just coming off of a cold. We had to reschedule. So for everybody who was here last week, apologies, we weren't here because I was in bed sleeping. So if I cough, that's the reason why. So today we're going to talk through landing pages, sessions, conversions, so basically the basics of BigQuery. So if you are a SQL ninja over here, this might not be for you, but hopefully you'll get some good nuggets. But if you are wondering why GA4 is not working, why your reports don't make any sense, this might be the opening of the door into a new future for you. I'll just give you a quick little brief of me. Hi, I'm JJ. I'm the manage Media Authentic. We are a measurement agency. So if you're between $10 and $100 million in revenue and you want to have this just done for you where you don't have to think about it, feel free to contact us because I'd be happy to chat with you.
Yeah. Cool. And my name is Ameet. I am the product manager for Analyst Canvas. We make a no-code data prep tool for Google Analytics and for agencies like JJ's who want to be able to pipeline their data, bring it in from various sources, and export it to locations like BigQuery, like Looker Studio, Tableau, etc. We have a nice little no-code tool to allow you to do that without stressing about all the SQL that we're going to talk to you about in the presentation today.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a little bit of a scare tactic here of like, but then also Ameet's gonna say, hey, this also works for you. Quick little plug on that's us, Media Authentic, and then Ameet over at Analytics Canvas, that is us. So there's the home screens. So a quick overview of our goals, guys, is a basic understanding of what in the world BigQuery is and how that works with GA4. We're going to have some practical applications of where you can use these in conjunction with each other. I'm going to even flirt with showing you our actual dashboards. And we're going to try out a few basic queries. Ameet's going to walk us through some like queries and also like some Analytics Canvas stuff as well. And we want to have some pros and cons here because frankly, there are pros and cons to just about everything in life, including, but not limited to, GA4 and BigQuery. A few things to consider, and lastly, we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. And this is all recorded, so do not hesitate. If we go fast or skip over something too quickly, you can always come back, make a note of the timestamp, and watch us and our faces again. So just to give a taste of what's possible, guys, this is our actual data. Go to mediaauthentic.com/demo. This is a Looker Studio report that's using Analytics Canvas and some custom SQL as well. So we actually did some nerdy stuff as well, but it builds out everything that you would want. And it is our actual data. So if you go to the website, you can find yourself probably if you're from a very, very odd country that isn't common. So there is that. So let's first talk through why, because basically, why are we even here? This is something that we just want to talk through really briefly of like, why on earth I didn't realize this existed 2 years ago. I guess like 36 months ago, this did not even exist, right? BigQuery and GA4 did not exist. It used to be where you had categories, actions, and labels in Google Analytics. And that's what you had. And you basically, from that, got to kind of strategize of how you wanted to shove information into these three things of category, action, and label. And then you'd use the API to kind of like jimmy rig things together and visualize it in Looker Studio or whatever else to use the API. Things got a little bit more complicated here, where we now have a data collection strategy. If you don't know what GA4 is, welcome. Basically, that you can now put almost unlimited combinations of events and parameters. So you can really make things customized, but with great power comes great responsibility. And then you have to figure out how to visualize the thing that you customized. And so now you have raw data, which everyone dreams of until they actually have it. And then they're like, hold up, let me just give me a second here. I need to take a breath. And then have to transform that into SQL and then visualize it. So there's a lot more steps here to make even better outcomes. We'll make the argument that it probably is a better outcome, but more steps to get there. And so if this is you and your organization, depending on where you are, if you're trying to say we should use BigQuery, we should not, we should use whatever, just remember that great power comes great responsibility. You can answer a lot of questions. You can do some really complex things. You can build very dynamic dashboards. You can create segments and cohorts and audiences. You can do anything you want to, but you could also be wildly wrong, spend way more than you thought you were going to spend. I have a story about that, what I'll share for another time, and waste a bunch of time for useless answers. So we want to avoid that at all costs, and you're going to have the power to both be amazing and also possibly other things there. So what is a landing page, right? That's one thing we're going to talk about. It's a journey, a time, users. Can it change over time? And how do you define that is something that we're going to really want to hop into here. So now Ameet is going to kind of walk us through the next pieces of this, of like, where does this all fit together?
Cool. Thanks, JJ. So first, let's level set on what is BigQuery and where does it fit into the whole reporting ecosystem. Google likes to call these reporting surfaces. So that's a relatively new term that they've started using. New to us, we just used to call these 4 different data sources, but this is what Google's calling reporting surfaces. So here in the web UI, you'll see that there's 2. There's the GA4 reports and GA4 explorations. If you're used to logging into Google Analytics, GA4, you will know that on the left-hand side there, that's where your reports are. That's where you're going to access these 2 reporting services from within inside the web interface. Then they have the Analytics Data API. And so this is a programmatic way to access data using an API to bring data into applications. Tools like Looker Studio, Tableau, Power BI. If you've used any of those tools, they will often have a GA4 connector or a Google Analytics connector. They're using the API to bring data in. This 4th source is this BigQuery event export. And I say event because, but there's now more than just the event export. There's some breaking news here, but it's the BigQuery export is what people refer to it as. Now, if you were a Universal Analytics customer, you were paying $150,000 a year to be able to have this level of detail. It was the hit level detail. So every last click was recorded into BigQuery. With GA4, it's very similar. Every single event that a user takes on your website is recorded into these BigQuery tables, and it's free. So it used to cost $150,000. Now it's included in all accounts. All we have to do is enable it. So you'll go over to your admin interface within GA4. You'll go under the product links section. You'll go to BigQuery, and then you'll set up the linking from there. You'll have some options. One of the options is going to be the export type. So they'll ask for whether you want the daily or the streaming export. The daily export is effectively a single table for every day that your website exists. And in that daily table, it's all the dimensions and metrics that are captured by BigQuery in the raw export. Okay, the streaming tables are something different. They're the intraday tables. So throughout the day, it says within seconds, maybe I've more observed it within minutes, but within the business day or within the day, you can query against these streaming tables and it will give you near real-time data. So that's the streaming export. Now, the streaming export doesn't benefit from some reprocessing. So it doesn't have, let's say, the most accurate traffic attribution data. That happens during the overnight processing jobs, and that gets loaded into the daily tables. So the daily tables tend to be more detailed. They're the ones that are going to be the record in perpetuity. The streaming tables are, again, only for the current day, and that table then disappears the next day. So at midnight for your view, the streaming table from yesterday gets reprocessed into the daily table. A new table starts for the next day, and it's only there until it gets converted to the daily table, and then that one's gone as well. Okay, that's the difference between those two. And there's some breaking news here. So just a week, maybe a week and a half ago, Google has started to slowly roll out these new user data tables. So instead of just the event level tables that are in BigQuery, these the tables that are currently there, which record every single last event that's in your data set, that's in the data set, there's now this user table. And the user tables, there's actually two of those. One is based on a user ID. That's something that you as a site owner can set and have attributed. The other is called a pseudo user ID, and that is a made up ID, basically based on the browser ID and then a timestamp that identifies a specific user. Now, these tables aren't as rich as we hoped that they would be. And just looking over them in the last few days ourselves, we see that they don't have a tremendous amount of detail, nor do they have a tremendous amount of users. We suspect that either this is still being rolled out and there will be more eventually, or that similar to just user metrics like demographic metrics in Google Analytics, there will be a limited amount of data available based on the volume of data presented. So Google doesn't want us to be able to identify individual users, and as such, they're going to limit some of the data. So there's a new table available. Bottom line, go back and check it if you haven't already. If it's not there today, it should be there soon. Make sure that you add that to your overall BigQuery export data set. All right, so a summary of the three. We suggest that you enable all of them. I know some people are concerned about BigQuery costs. The costs are super low, and I think that's a link. So when you do get the slides, you'll be able to go to a link from our site that talks about the BigQuery export costs. And the bottom line is, for the vast majority of us, it's pennies to dollars per month to store the data. It's the processing that's really going to add up. And there's different ways to process this data. There's the right way and the wrong way. And the wrong way, yeah, you can blow the budget. You can do some really foolish things, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you do things the right way, this is an incredibly affordable solution. And you can get this rich detail for dollars per month, okay? So if you haven't already, go ahead and turn them on now. We'll wait. I'm just kidding. But turn them on. So some advantages of doing this. Why would you turn it on? The number one reason is detail. You will get so much more information in this BigQuery data set than you would in the API or in the web interface. You can answer questions that you just can't answer when you're using the other three reporting surfaces. And I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, a customer of ours came and said, hey, I'm trying to make a query for date, hour, minute by city. Okay, seems reasonable. There's a date, hour, minute dimension in the API. There's the city dimension in the API. But if you pick them both together, you get this note that says, hey, the selected dimensions and metrics are incompatible. You can't actually get that result set. BigQuery doesn't say that to you. It gives you all that rich detail. You just need to structure the query properly, and you can have that answer set. And so that's more often than not the answer to the questions that we often get. Why can't I do this with the API, or how do I do this level of analysis? So often the answer is, oh, you need the BigQuery export to do that. Have you turned it on? And if you haven't, there's no backfill. So there's no way to get that historic data. So if you turn it on today, you'll start collecting data from today onwards, and that will be your result set. So yet another reason to turn it on today. The second most popular reason for this export is that it has both a user ID and a session ID. So now we can do a level of analysis that we just cannot do with the API. The user ID is a big one. People often like to count total number of users on their websites. Using the API, you just can't ask for users and then summarize them. Users are a calculated metric. They're not something that you can summarize, just like bounce rate or page views per session. It's a calculation of the number of users that meet all the criteria of your dimensions for those particular dates. You cannot summarize them. You'll get the wrong answer. With the BigQuery export, you can ask for those IDs. You can do count distincts over them and get the right answer for your questions. For the API, now, if you started using the API a few years ago, you were in heaven. It had lots of data, no data limits. You were able to power your dashboards. And then in November of 2022, Google kind of put the hammer down, and they said, APIs are expensive. Serving this data is expensive. Our API is not your data warehouse. BigQuery is your data warehouse. So if you're going to use the API, you're going to now play within these token limits that we've established. So every website gets a certain number of tokens per day and per hour, and that's all you can ask for. If you hit those limits in terms of the amount of data that you've requested, the number of rows of data that you've requested, they just stop. They just say, sorry, you've hit the token limit, sit out for an hour, you're in a timeout, try again an hour later. Well, that's not a really good way to do analysis. It's certainly not an efficient way to do analysis. And so that's yet another good reason. If you have a high volume site, if you have an e-commerce site and you have lots of details in your page paths and lots of distinct page paths, you'll run into this thing called other. In universal analytics, it was called report query limiting. Now we just kind of call it other. It relates to a cardinality limit. Google will only collect a certain number of rows in each of the tables that they create per day. So if the number of, say, page paths exceeds 50,000, which is the cardinality limit, they just won't collect any more data into that table, and you'll instead get this one row called all other. Well, if you're trying to do some landing page analysis, which we're about to do next, you just won't be able to do it. You'll have a subset of your data. So it's kind of like sampling, but worse, because it's not even sample data. We just get one row called other, and everything is attributed to it. So we don't really know which page were they on when they triggered this event and things like that. So yet another issue with the API. The last one is about integration with other data sources and applications. But for me, this is really about, as a marketer, being introduced to BigQuery and to having a place where you can store volumes of data that is not on somebody's hard drive and that is not in a bunch of CSV files that have been emailed to someone. This is a place where we can all work off of the exact same data set, and not just for GA4, by the way. So GA4 is going to introduce you to it, which I think is great. But once you have BigQuery and once you start get used to using it, you can now see this as a resource for the rest of your reporting. And you'll find that you can do things faster, you can do things at a better scale, you can do things in a more cost-effective way, et cetera, et cetera. So not directly attributed to GA4 BigQuery, but I think still for marketers, for people who work with data, it is a huge step forward, and it's a great way to get introduced to that, to the world of BigQuery. Now, what about some drawbacks? As JJ mentioned, there's nothing is only good. There's always a downside to everything. Well, first and foremost, this data set is raw, as in you have to do your own calculations. Google doesn't calculate things for you. So you're used to getting a metric like bounce rate. Sorry, you've got to calculate that yourself. You're used to getting a dimension like landing page. Sorry, you've got to figure that out on your own. So it is really a raw data set that requires you to understand it and to be able to model over it in order to create the correct queries and to get the right answers for the questions that you're asking. There is no Google Ads or Search Console data. So in the API, you can ask for ads data. You can ask for some data from Search Console, present that to you directly using the API. You just don't have that data in BigQuery, unfortunately. Similarly, data that's modeled, that is for people who don't accept the consent tracking on your site. If they opt out of that, then in the web interface and those two reporting surfaces, Google will model that data, but both the API and BigQuery do not benefit from that. So if a user opts out of being tracked, you just don't have information about that session or that user. The third one is the cost risk, and I say that it's for the inexperienced. And it's really true. We've seen these over the last 6 to 8 months. I think JJ might have also been stung by this. This is when we first met. If you do things the wrong way, yes, your costs can go up. And by the wrong way, I'm going to show an example in a minute. But part of it involves just understanding how the Google Cloud Console works, where to set budgets, and then what to do when the budget is exceeded. Because it's not enough to say to Google, hey, I only want to spend $5 per month. Like, that's my budget. They'll hit that budget. They'll warn you when you get to that budget, but they won't stop charging you at that budget, which is JJ's nodding his head because he learned that one the hard way, I think. So they'll keep going.
And just to like put a framing on that, I have to allude to something and be like, oh yeah, I know what it's like. Just for everyone watching this, is when they first launched this BigQuery export, I had the great idea of using our largest client and bypassing all of our developer skills that we have on staff. And I was going to write some SQL, which I shouldn't be doing. I'm okay. I can get by. But I wrote this really inefficient query that was so bad and so terrible that we spent $3,000 in like 18 hours. And mind you, they're upwards of almost hitting the 1 million events per day. So like they are a high volume site. But just for context, is now we use like partially Analytics Canvas and partially like some actual like SQL. And I think our total cost for them is like $250 a month. And so now that's like what's used is like $250 a month from $3,000. That's like a very good trajectory of the amount of cost that you get from knowledge, just learning how it works.
Yeah. And Google tells us how to do things the right way. They tell us to stage these tables in date partition summary tables, and don't query over the whole thing for every single chart and table in your dashboard, which is what Looker Studio does. That's how it ran up the bill. They tell us how to do things, and here at Analyst Canvas, we just productize that. Other products will do the same thing. And so if you are going to use the export, we just caution you to make sure that you don't just throw your queries into the cloud console. Think about what you're asking for first. Ask for the preview. It will actually tell you how much it's going to cost before you run it. You can do a bunch of things to make sure that you don't blow the bank. But it can be scary for some, right? Because even some people don't want to spend the $20 a month. They're like, how do I avoid that? How do I keep this cost down? I'm worried that somebody else can come on the team and make a mistake, and then that'll blow through the budget. So there is some hesitancy because of that. We got some solutions for that. We like to tell people not to worry. As long as you're using a tool like Canvas, we control all those things for you. Or if you're working with an agency, they are well aware of those issues, and they will keep you from making those mistakes. But just beware that if you do have a large site, you can run up the costs pretty quickly. The other drawback, though, is, of course, it requires knowledge of SQL, or at least it did to a point. Now, I myself am not an SQL expert. I know enough to be dangerous, kind of like JJ there. I could spend a whole bunch of time reviewing this model and trying to understand it. I don't think it's the right thing for most of us to do. I think it's important to know that it's SQL based and to be able to read through it and understand what the SQL is doing, but to actually have to write every single last piece of this, every single last piece of the syntax, it's not required. And it can be daunting for some who think that they just have to write it all. Don't worry, you don't. Finally, just the whole complexity of working with BigQuery and being in the cloud console, setting up the budgets, querying over there, connecting BigQuery to your reporting tools. There's a level of complexity there that I think is causing some hesitancy. Again, I think with a little bit of education, a little bit of knowledge around this, your minds can be at ease. But for sure, it can be daunting from the outset to look at it and say, never used BigQuery before, never really used a database before, and now I'm going to be asked to lay down a credit card that has a very difficult to set a limit. It can be daunting for some people. All right, let's move on to querying over landing pages. So as I had mentioned earlier, some of the dimensions in these tables are just not available to you. You have to calculate them. In the raw event export, so many of these dimensions are calculated. So there's no landing page path, there's no first session first source medium, there's no exit page, etc. We have to calculate them. So how do you do that? Well, to find a landing page in a session, what we have to do first is write this 65 lines of SQL here, complete with a couple of joins and some more complex math in there. But the bottom line is to be able to find the landing page, we first need to identify a session and then find the first page that the session viewed, right? So let's drill into that on the next slide here. So this kind of 3/4 of the way down of the SQL here, what this part is doing is finding for each session that was for each session ID over the time period, unpack the event parameters, find the page location, rank all the pages that this session visited by the timestamp, the event timestamp that they went to, and then the first one is going to be called the landing page. So that's how we find a landing page in BigQuery versus just clicking the landing page button and using the API, which gives us the landing page. Now, of course, Google's doing this same kind of calculation in the background. When they deliver data through the API or through the web interface, it is also raw data, and they are also calculating it. It's just that now we're on our own to make this calculation. And by the way, Google hasn't published a book for us telling us how to make these calculations. We've got to figure this stuff out on our own. And so here at Analyst Canvas, we've done a really good job of figuring this stuff out. And we've got these queries available to you here. So great, we've found the first session. We found the landing pages by finding the first page in the session for each day. And so now we can make this query in one of three ways, right? We can go to the BigQuery console. We can just copy and paste that query in, and it's going to return a result. We can use a BI tool, something like Looker Studio or Tableau. I've got it in bold red letters there saying don't do that, because that is where we can really add up the costs, or use a third-party tool like Analyst Canvas. the advantage of using the third-party tool, or even using it step number one, is that you can create a staging table off of this data. So instead of querying over all of these tables, the full history, all the in going through each of the event parameters to extract the page locations, what we do is we extract the data once, we keep it into a summary table, and then we query over this much smaller summary table instead of the full export. That is what's going to keep the costs significantly lower than if you were to run that query directly in the console or in a tool like Looker Studio.
And just to reiterate kind of what Ameet was saying there, is when he says like write over tables, is by default, when you think, hey, I'm going to ask a question, you usually ask that question for all eternity, right? You say, hey, how many sessions were on our site per day, right? And then you hit go and you run that for every day that has ever happened. And then you do that again tomorrow and then every day. So every single day you're getting 1 day more of data, but you're querying 1 more day of data. And so instead of doing that, you don't have to do that. You could just say, hey, I need to know what yesterday was or the past few days, and then combine that with your historical data. And now you're building a story as opposed to just like re-asking the entire question. The way I like to refer to it is like if you have amnesia and you don't remember anything, you have to keep telling that person the same story, right? Everyone has like a grandmother or somebody with like dementia, and you have to, or like even your own parents or spouse might be like telling the same thing again. But like, imagine you did always tell the story of like how you got a scar or whatever else, or how you did this, as opposed to just like reminding them the last, like, oh yeah, yesterday I went out in the sun and I got sunburned. That's why I'm red today. As opposed to like having your entire history of why you are the way you are. And so that's my quick and dirty example of that, but hopefully that makes sense as far as to like, you're adding on as opposed to like restarting the entire story.
That's a good point. And that is just how Looker Studio is built. Looker Studio is not meant to warehouse this data for you. When you make this query in Looker Studio, it's going to make the query once, and then it's only for you in that session now. Your colleague lands on the same report. They just hit the refresh button. Guess what? This is a whole new user and a whole new set of queries, right? Because Google BigQuery doesn't remember, rather Looker Studio doesn't remember that it already has this data, and it's available for anybody who's querying over this exact data set. It hasn't staged the data. It doesn't keep it in memory. It asks for the data raw and fresh for each and every query. And then again, if you're asking for the full history of data each time, you're querying over this massive raw data set. Every single day is a table, and for every day in that table, it's going to go into the event parameters, which is an expensive part of the query, to now go and find that exact one particular answer and bring that forward, that landing page path or the page path, and bring that forward. If it has to do that repeatedly over and over, that's where your costs add up. Whereas if you stage that data, you keep it in memory, either in your own BigQuery tables or in another tool, you then each day just add that one piece of information to that table. You serve that much smaller table to Looker Studio through a third-party connector, through Sheets, through Excel, through whatever else. And now you're querying over a much smaller data set, and it's going to cost you a lot less, right? So this is the main reason why we don't use it raw SQL in Looker Studio. And that's, by the way, the same reason why Google Analytics for the API team said, no more use of this, no more unrestricted use of the API. They had to put the token limit in place because it was really expensive to serve that data over and over again for every single user every single day. So that's just some inside information as to why that actually came to be.
All right. So now, guys, you've had this little bit of a, like, the door has been cracked into this world of data. And I think this is kind of BigQuery is in this thing where it's overlapping marketing with data people. And that conversation can always be a little bit rough because marketers speak one language and data people speak a different. But we're going to try and kind of bridge that gap and walk through that door together. Okay. So scope is a problem. And you're like, what is scope? I'm not a sniper over here. Scope is what something is broken down by. And I talk to my team all the time about this is like the thing I am just on my pedestal preaching, is you have to ask, I call them buy questions, because everybody that I've seen on the internet writes just questions. But the second that you ask a buy, you're out of luck. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Say, for example, you're like, how many sessions did we have? And that's a question that a marketer would ask. But then over which time range? Like sessions, cool. Like of all eternity, we've had 10 million sessions over the past 10 years we've been in business. Okay, like not very helpful. So you have to break that down by something, usually by date. Let's just say it's by individual day. So now you have sessions broken down by day. Awesome. Now, what if I want sessions broken down by country that they were visited from, right? And so you can have these by questions. And what you have to consistently be thinking of is, can I add these back up? Can I add up my by question again? So for example, if I say how many sessions happened in all eternity, and I say 10 million, awesome. How many sessions happened by day? If I add up every day, I should get to 10 million. Like they should add up to 10 million. If I break sessions down by country, theoretically, like we're not going to talk about these nuances, theoretically, it should add up because you can't have one session that spans 2 countries, theoretically, right? Is that you should be able to add that up. Same thing goes for if you broke sessions down by landing page, because technically a landing page is the start of a session. You should be able to add that up. What we have on the screen in front of you is sessions broken down by page. That might be a question that you ask, right? So just for everybody play along at home, is you have about us, by today, and blog-ready, right? You have 3 pages. I've said I want this broken down by pages. Well, the fact of the matter is that about us had 3,800 page views. I mean, that page was loaded up 3,800 times. There was 2,800 sessions. So technically you could have a field that calculates number of page views per session, because that's maybe it's the home page, or it's a very prominent page, so people visit it 1.3 times on average, okay? The problem you're gonna run into is if you sum up sessions, you're now gonna have a lot more sessions because people navigate throughout your site. So the same example that I just gave of sessions broken down by day and then adding up the days, getting the total number of 10 million doesn't apply here, because you can no longer add sessions up because you've broken it down by a scope that does not add up. That line number 2 is correct. There was 2,800 sessions that hit the about page. Some of those sessions might have gone to buy. Some of those sessions might have gone to the blog. Some of those sessions might have done other things. So you cannot sum that up. But you can sum up page views, because page views are tied to the page. So now you can easily add those up instead of having the dreaded overcounting. And this is the problem, I don't know, Ameet, in your experience, that happens the most. Mm-hmm. This is the most problematic problem of the marketing data world. And
100%. We get that. That is the number one question that people in the trial ask us. They will pull something like pages and sessions and event name into their query, and then they're going to make a scorecard in Looker Studio, and they'll summarize on sessions, and they'll say, wait a second, why are there so many sessions here? It's because you included pages, and now what you have is a table that shows how many sessions went to each page. And a session, as you said, can go to more than one page. So the total number of pages that person viewed is included in that session count. That's why we can't simply summarize.
And that's like exactly the case. If you can grasp your head around this, regardless of how good you are at SQL or anything else, like it doesn't really matter. But if one person saw 5 pages, it's still one session. That's what you got to understand. And this is like, again, to reiterate this, is that one person visits the about page, the home page, etc. It's one session. It's not the sum of those pages, okay? But if we change that to landing page, it might work, right? But we've introduced another problem now, is that what Ameet just said, is that if you add landing page and page to the same report, you cannot add up anything, because now you're saying how many sessions came from about our staff. They started their journey on our about our staff and saw the page about our staff, or saw learn more, or saw reasons why. And so now this is just massively fragmented. We've asked the by question, like of saying, I want this broken down by landing page, by whatever. And you're not summing that up. You're not adding those together for your life. You would never be able to do it. And so that's the biggest thing you're going to have to encounter as you start to build out reports, whether that's the API, which kind of limits you by yourself. Like it kind of gives you a little bit of limitation of like, oh, you can't do that. Sometimes that's still like not helpful. Like it'll still not equal the answer you thought. But in BigQuery, to Ameet's point, is nothing exists. Like you define what scope means. If you think that landing page should be the second page someone viewed, that is now landing page. You just made it up, and that is now what exists in your world. And so that's something that we wanted to just like, I really wanted to drill home to you, is that that's something that we have to kind of encounter. Users, pages, events, or items. This is the easiest way I found to think about all of your questions, is you cannot mix these together. If you do, you have to really know what you're doing. Like we do it, like our team can do it because we understand how they play together. But if you're asking a user question, you can't have a page question. If you're asking a session question, you can't have a user question. You kind of have to define everything by the question that you're asking, because you're going to have this level of complexity to every single breakdown. For example, if you ask a user level question and you say, hey, how many users saw the thing yesterday? Well, what if they saw it yesterday and they bought today? Well, which date are we going to use, right? Those are problems that you're going to encounter that we have to really start to think about and ask better questions. For sessions, you might have landing pages, conversions, session dates. For pages, you might have scrolls and clicks. Maybe for event questions, you have event count, or maybe the number of sessions that did that event. And then maybe you have item questions of what the heck people have in their carts, right? But the second that you add these together, you've got to start asking, what question are you asking? Because you're probably sitting yourself with the coffee cup to your head, trying to cool off with your iced coffee because we are overwhelming you with information. But the biggest thing you have to think about is, what is your question? Because a lot of people come into this and just click everything in Analytics Canvas, or write SQL that's like select all from table, and they're just like select star, which means select everything. And you end up with like everything, which is not good, because when you have everything, you have nothing.
Yes.
And so that's like the biggest thing here, is like the takeaway from this little section right here is ask your question first. And if you have by questions, make sure those by questions are summable, or you're not going to sum them. It's okay to have a table with the sessions per page, but you cannot sum that to have the total number of sessions. So that's just a quick little aside there. And now back over to Ameet to hopefully like round out your full learning on this concept.
Yeah. Cool. So we looked a little bit earlier at how do we find a landing page, right? So we find the sessions, we have the session ID in BigQuery. So we find the session IDs, all of them. We find what was the first page view in each of their sessions, and that is our landing page. So next we need to find the conversion events. So which events are conversion events? And then we want to find landing pages that had conversion events. So which landing pages were leading to conversions, right? So first we're going to find that landing page for each session. Now, again, you can go and write the SQL you want or find a guide online and try and use that. Or here we have the Analytics Canvas Query Builder, where all I did was check these dimensions and metrics on the left-hand side there, and it generates the SQL over here on the right. So now I've got my landing page, I've got session date, event name, landing page, session ID, and the event count metric in there. Okay. So next we need to find our conversion events. Hey, guess what? BigQuery doesn't have this field. So this is another one of those where BigQuery just lets you define your own conversion events. But if you want to use the ones that are already in your account, the ones that you would find in the UA web interface, or sorry, the GA4 web interface, either under events or under conversions, it will show you which events have been marked as conversion events for your property. Okay, so that's the starting point. Those are the ones that are going to be considered as conversion events. Next, using the API, what we've done here is simply ask for event name, and then this field that's only in the API called is conversion event. So that tells us for this event, is it a conversion event or not? And then we just ask for event count because the API makes you have at least one metric. Otherwise, it won't return you any data. And so we get something like this. And the data folks in this room here are going to be looking at this saying, hey, why would you have a string and a Boolean in the same column? Like, why do they have true and then not set? Well, guess what? There's also blanks, and it can repeat a field. So for example, if today I changed one of these events, maybe I changed click from not a conversion event to a conversion event, then from today forward, it's going to appear as a conversion event. And from all the history behind this, it is not going to be a conversion event. So you can actually have multiple values in this table. And so that's why we do a little bit of data prep using something like a no-code data prep tool to allow you to clean this little data set and get you something that's usable. So here now we have our the first table, which is our landing pages by session ID with the event names in it. We now have a Google Sheet. So I've created a Google Sheet that's now cleaned up that data off of the raw API call that has all of my events listed in it, and then another column that just says whether or not it's a conversion event. So then I join those two together, right? That's the third block here. And that looks something like this. Classic Venn diagram of an inner join type. And they all join cleanly, of course, because every row in the table has an event that's already been accounted for. And so now we have exactly the same number of rows going into this table as we had coming out. But our table now has this one new column, okay? They're very similar to doing a VLOOKUP for those who are Excel and Sheets users. This would be like doing a VLOOKUP on the event name and whether or not it's a conversion event. And so now we have this full table that shows for every event and the landing page, was there a conversion event associated with it? And now we build out our workflow. So this is where things start to get a little bit tricky, but the way that we've laid this out, it's a step-by-step process. So again, Canvas is a no-code query builder. We'll show you the steps one by one. You can also just write this in SQL. So your SQL would be a combination of all these steps. You could also do this in Excel or Google Sheets. You will be doing the exact same thing, okay? So let's just talk through this quickly. First, we have our landing pages, but with session ID event. So that's our primary table. We then have our reference file from Google Sheets, and we join those together into that third block there. So now we have that table that includes all of our events, our session IDs, and whether or not the event was a conversion event. We're then going to filter for just conversion events, right? So in Excel, you're just going to use the drop down to filter on it. Here in Canvas, we're going to add a filter block, and we're going to filter anything that's not a conversion event out of this data set. We're then going to do a group by or a summary. You could do a pivot table in Excel to get a summarized result set that only has the fields that we want. So here we have landing page, we have event name, and we have the AC session UID. So that's the session ID for each user who came to the site that day. Okay. Next, we go to the calculation block, which is to create a column for each of the conversion events. So here I've added file downloads and form submissions, and I've got an expression that says if the event name is file download, provide the AC session ID, the count of the AC session ID, or otherwise replace it with a 0. And I've done the same thing with form submissions. By doing that, then I summarize it all to get it into a single row for each page, and then I just sort it, right? Something that you would do in Looker Studio or in Excel. And then we end up with a table like this. We have our landing pages, and we have the conversion events for those landing pages. So here we can start to see that our home page is converting well. Our download pages does okay. That's where the form submissions are coming from. And then we have a longer list of pages that from our blog that are also converting, right? You may notice, though, that there's some UTM parameters in here, and couldn't we clean this up and have this all attributed to the same landing page? Yes, we can and should do that. But the way that the data comes out of Google Analytics and out of the BigQuery export, it includes those parameters. So a next step in this exercise would be to say, aggregate this one step further, and now strip those parameters off the landing page path so that we get a better representation of the total number of conversions for each landing page. All right.
All right, everybody. So that is kind of the entry into this world, right? We'll send some of that SQL to you guys in the follow-up if you want that. Like, just put like a comment of like, I'll take it in the chat. Also, to what Ameet said on that exact like landing page thing, if you head to our demo that I just put in the chat, that is the exact process that you have to go through to build something that has landing pages and then the outcomes associated with that landing page, right? So if you're looking to have this done, basically MediaAuthentic.com, you can contact us. We can hop on a call and see if we're a great fit. And Ameet, like, how can they get in contact with you guys?
Yeah, head over to analystcanvas.com. There is a free trial. You can jump right in. No sales call required, no credit card required. There is some tutorials available to you. And then you'll get a series of emails from us showing you how to do things. There's also a knowledge base on our website that and a large series of videos now that will take you through things step by step. So if you're interested in using the no-code query builder, if you're even just interested in, say, learning how this SQL builder works, you can go ahead and use the free trial. We do have the Google demo data set in there, so you don't even need to connect your own accounts. You can just take it for a spin and see what it's like.
And if you guys are wanting to learn kind of about like how we as an agency and also like providers use tools like Analytics Canvas and just measurement in general, betterthandata.com is our training platform. We can just kind of share what we're doing at our agency. We have an Analytics Canvas course actually in there, and it's going to be updated and changed once there's a few new fields coming that I have some secret insight about. And once those are in there, we're going to have some new courses about Analytics Canvas specifically, because frankly, it saves us a lot of time. So betterthandata.com is where you can find that. And now guys, Q&A. There's been some questions already. So I'm going to start with those, and I'm going to see if I think if I push this button, it should work. So let me just see.
I was going to say, so Mendy dropped that in the chat there. You need to do better than data. I got to give it to JJ. JJ's put together a course on using Canvas with a specific focus on GA4. He's way out ahead of us. So he's got some really good modules in there that will show you how to use the tool, how to do specific types of analysis. Whereas the resources on our site are still somewhat generic. They're like, how do you connect to Google Analytics? How do you extract the data from BigQuery? What are the costs involved, and how does Canvas control costs? Whereas JJ gets right into the meat of things, and it was going to show you how things work. So definitely echo what Mendy said there. Check out Better Than Data. They got some really good stuff in there.
All right. And so can you guys see the question that Rick posted on your screens? Can someone put yes in the chat? But basically Rick asked, does the data flowing into BigQuery and the API match the data in GA4 under the device-based reporting identity? Oh, right. That greatly worded question. You got the device-based. So if anybody else is, there we go. I'll take a quick stab at this, and then Ameet, if you have any other thoughts, we can go to you. Okay. Sure. So basically, the API that is going to be returned from GA4, no one really knows exactly how those fields are calculated. We can guess. We can guess landing page is the first page in a session. Most people assume that's correct, and it's probably pretty close. But you can not get exactly the same data. You just won't, because of privacy concerns or privacy policy acceptance, because of dates, right? For example, which time zone is being reported in GA4 versus in BigQuery, and are you converting that to the correct time zone in Looker Studio? There's a lot of little nuances. I will say anecdotally, at our agency, we usually get within 3% to 5% of GA4. If you can build it in GA4, usually we're within 3% of that number. So that's
yeah, and that's good, and that's about what to expect. The data sources won't match. Very thankful to Manaz Kazi. He is was the developer advocate for GA and GA4. He published an article about the differences between the BigQuery export and the web reports, the other reporting services, and why they don't and won't match. So it is by design that they're not going to match. They should be directionally similar, but you cannot expect them to match exactly, because they are different reporting. They're different ways of reporting the data. They're different collection mechanisms, etc. And they are actually pulling from different sources. The GA4 BigQuery data source is not what's used to power the API, oddly enough. So it's a different data source. It does have different data. Manaz does explain in that article that even something as simple as sessions, which you would think, hey, a session should just be a session. It should be the exact same in both places. Well, in the web interface, they use an algorithm called Hyperlog++ to estimate or approximate the total number of sessions. It is not an exact count. Whereas in the BigQuery reporting, or in the BigQuery export, we can only count those user IDs where we had consent, or where they had consent to flow that data through to us. So we only get data in BigQuery that was flowed through based on user consent. And so we're not going to have all the user IDs. We won't have all the session IDs. And so the two numbers just will not match. We have different sources of information, and there's going to be a discrepancy. So again, we're looking for directional similarity. We're not looking for an exact match. 3 to 5% would be a really good tolerance. If you're outside of that, then you got to start asking some questions about, are these queries exactly the same? Is it the same time period? Is it the same view? Am I summarizing on something to get this comparison result set that I shouldn't be summarizing on? Things like that.
And it's usually wildly off or pretty close. That's like in my experience. It's like you do something and you're like, you're either like, this is like 100 times what I thought, or it's like, we're within 10%. Like, so that's that. And if anyone has more questions, guys, you can drop them in the chat. I'm gonna just keep working through the questions that have already been asked. So if you have more questions, just drop them in and we'll kind of get those one by one here in the next 5 minutes here. All right, Lynn asked a question. I'll let you take a stab at this, Ameet.
Sure. Yeah, BigQuery is free, but you have to pay. Yeah, I can see how that can be a little confusing. It is free and available to everybody. So it used to be that in order to get the BigQuery export, in order to get that raw hit level detail, you used to have to pay $150,000 per year to Google Analytics just to have that. Your querying costs are separate. So it's like buying a car. You can buy the car, but you still got to put gas in it, right? So yeah, you paid for the car outright. You still have to pay for the gas to go through it. It's the same with BigQuery. So having the data there is one thing. We have to pay for storage, and storage is incredibly cheap. $20 a terabyte a month. And most of us are not coming anywhere near a terabyte of data on our websites. So you're going to be just fine. It is the processing costs that add up. And so every time you ask a BigQuery question, it fires up the engine, it processes that data, and it gives you an answer. They charge you for that. That's they bill based on processing fees and the total number of bytes that it took to process that answer set. So it's free to have the BigQuery export available, right? So you don't have to pay the $150,000 anymore, but you do have to pay for your storage and you do have to pay for your processing costs. So I hope, Lynn,
a way that I think about it is kind of like, imagine, have you ever been in like a big city where they have like little scooters or like bikes? Imagine if the scooters or bikes were free, but they charge you per mile. You could use a bike for free, but like you have to pay, I don't know, a penny per mile. Same kind of concept here. So that's a quick little learning on that. All right, a couple more questions, and then I think we're going to wrap this up, folks. So if you have a question that you would like our eyes on, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, question on Search Console. Is Search Console linked to BigQuery? Any thoughts on that, Ameet, of just in general?
Yeah, so I think John asked another related question about Google Ads does not allow any of its data to be exported to BigQuery. So my point around this was that in the API and in the web interface, you will see data from Search Console and from Google Ads if you have gone and made the link inside your GA4 admin interface. But none of that data gets flowed through to the BigQuery export. That raw BigQuery export is only the web analytics data. It does not include the Google Ads data, and it does not include the Search Console data. Search Console and Google Ad both also have a BigQuery linking feature. So you can get your Search Console data in a BigQuery data set. You then have to query over it, write your SQL to get it out. And same with Google Ads. Google Ads will put their data into a BigQuery data set, but it's not inside the GA4 BigQuery data set. That's what I meant by that.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, hopefully you had fun. And this will be sent out here in the next I think a few hours. It'll get an email automatically, and then I will get the SQL that Ameet shared, just so that you can kind of see what that means to get a landing page. And then what we'll do is I'll probably send an email out tomorrow with that information. If you're in the States or if you're in somewhere else that has a vacation holiday on Monday, have a great long weekend. And other than that, guys, we'll see you around. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time today.